Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special podcast recording of Scatter by Nua Collective, our brand new exhibition, which was launched recently for Culture Night Ireland last September. I'm here this evening with Anne Martin Walsh, John Murray, and Katrīna Tračuma. Today's exercise really is just to try and give our audiences another perspective of our Scatter collection, just so that we can share with you what our incentive was, what our concepts were, and how we were kind of focused on the different subject matter throughout the making process, what we actually see in a literal sense and in a conceptual sense for each of the artworks that feature within this exhibition. So Scatter, it was a theme that we came together to discuss a couple of months ago, and we were looking at different things that are happening in the media, things that are happening in the world, and things that were happening and developing and evolving through history and what we potentially will see in the future. Across diverse contexts, whether in the shifting patterns of the sky, the migration of people, the application of paint, or the passage of time, there exists a universal experience of scattering. As humans, we find ourselves dispersed by forces, both external and internal, whether through geographic relocation, emotional distance, or the natural progression of life. Yet within this scattering lies a profound potential for reconnection. Our roots, relationships, and shared histories form intricate networks that, despite physical or emotional distances, continue to bind us together. This process of scattering and reuniting, of shedding the old to embrace the new, reflects the dynamic and resilient nature of the human experience. Whether scattered by choice or circumstance, we carry within us the threads that link us back to our origins, to each other, and to the ever-present possibility of reconnection. So I think the first question that I'm going to ask each of us here today is, when you heard the word scatter, what was your immediate kind of response or your immediate thought?
Well, for me, it was the people. I immediately thought of migration, people, forced migration too, and what was actually going on in the world, and how people were being forced out of their own countries, homes, etc. That struck me, but I presume that was because foremost in my mind for the last year is and more is what's going on in the world. So,
Absolutely. Katrīna, have you anything to add to that?
I mean, I definitely thought in the same vein, and also just an analog of how animals and birds too scatter, similar to humans. But yes, it essentially evoked ideas of movement and merging, perhaps, separating.
Amazing. And John, what's your interpretation of the
Yeah, I mean,
concept?
I remember when we were just discussing the title, we saw that scatter was, the English for diaspora, and I was thinking of all the diasporas, all the scattered peoples around the world, including Irish people, and the people who, as Anne was saying, have been forced to leave their homeland due to wars and conflicts. And I also did think, the term is often used sort of colloquial as "let's scatter," let's sort of like run when there's a dangerous situation. So those are some of the thoughts I had.
And I think that's something that I think a lot of us took on board when we were in the making process and when we were bringing forward different ideas. And what we generally do as a collective to kind of give our viewers an insight to how that process works is that together we come and discuss what it is that we potentially want to talk about, and then what we potentially want to make as a collective. And when Scattered came to the table, that was something that I think everybody immediately thought of and thought there was plenty to kind of unpack there. There are 19 pieces in this collection by a number of our artists within the collective, and they are across multiple mediums, including photography, painting, and drawing, sketching, and mixed media. So there's lots of things to discover here. So let's get on with it and move to our first piece. For this piece by Christina Geoghegan called Curracloe Beach, can we just give the viewers a full description of what we see?
Okay, I'm looking at it as tones of grey with a lot of depth in it and a feeling of landscape, like I'm looking at what seems to be landscape with maybe sunrise, sunset in the distance.
Yeah, a vertical image that is grayscale with high contrast between light and the darkest darks. It does appear to seem as a landscape and could possibly be mistaken for a black and white photograph, and that there's a bit of a loss of focus between the spots that are more high contrast white and then all the gray tones, and then there's really darker colors going towards the bottom of the image.
I would sort of concur with what the others have said, and also that there's seems to be an element of it. It could be, I see something like almost like an eruption from something. There seems to be a center point, and there seems to be material emerging from that center point being sort of scattered all over I think it's a wood surface. So that's an element of scatter that I see, and it's something that's just come to the boil and blown.
Yeah. And finally, just to add from what I take on it, what I do see immediately is the textural element of it. You can see that it is quite rough, or potentially it's not a smooth surface. There are elements of potentially what could be sand or something that's definitely embossed from the art piece. And I think that is a great overall multi-perspective literal response to this piece. This piece is 60 by 100 centimeters. It's spray paint on board and done, as I said, by Christina Geoghegan. So folks, now we kind of go into the more conceptual response to this and how it connects to scatter. What is your take, or what do you think?
Perhaps a scattering of the media itself that's being used. So I can see that in the dotting and the texture, like you're calling it, but I just get a feeling of distance, that there's a distance to travel, or that you're being thrown into this or scattered into this distant void nearly, where you have to keep moving, keep going forward into it.
Yeah, definitely. I totally get that too. And I think interestingly, as you say, the material, I suppose, when you use spray paint as a process, it does tend to scatter everywhere, destroys every surface, including the surface you're trying to work on. But yeah, no, I definitely do get that distance as well. And potentially the scatter from dark to light is maybe another kind of element.
This illusion of the perspective with the highlight lighter point kind of imitating distance, and then with the darkest sides seemingly closer, and the fact that it does appear at first glance like a black and white photograph, possibly in movement because it is out of focus seeming, makes me think of someone or someone viewing this from like inside a moving vehicle through a window. So perhaps this is a moving image still, essentially, that's being witnessed by somebody who's being displaced.
Just one other thing. I'm looking at the title, Curracloe Beach. I did think of getting a view of the inside of a wave as it breaks, something like that. Maybe the sand being thrown in different directions by the momentum of the energy of the breaking waves.
I suppose thinking then like that between what happens with water and how water connects between land and how there is that distance between it. And I suppose when we think about scattering on a more universal or global level, we think about how we are divided and how we connect between different spaces, and how we go to different spaces in order to have that divide between us, I suppose. And I think that's something that really, it kind of brings to the forefront of this discussion. But I'm sure that will appear again as we go through more of the works. So we'll move on from Christina's work now and into Katrīna's. So Katrīna, we'll let you go into quiet mode for a second before we bring you in to discuss about your piece and to give your own interpretation of it. But what we'll do first, as ever, is we'll give the literal representation of what we see.
Okay, I see a room, a sketch of internal of the room with like anyone's living room, perhaps, or somewhere, with a family gathering. So a lot of people nearly gathered together, like they're going to have their photograph taken.
I mean, I'd see the same, but I also see that it's from the clothes they're wearing, that it's not contemporary. It's, maybe early 20th century, something like that. And from the looks in the faces, it's somewhere in Europe. It's hard to say whether the family's well off or not, but it seems to be a nice sitting room, sitting at a table. People seem to be happy.
Yeah, and I think even to be even more literal, again, to point out some of the objects that are present. So we have like a draped curtain over potentially the door in the background and the window closer to the left. There's hanging photographs. There's a man with a hat and a gun. There are people that are sitting on the floor, people who are sitting on seats. There are people leaning on the table. There's there are elements of the black and white in the center that are more kind of filled in than what they are on the outside pieces. So kind of like if you're drawn into, there's like 3 or 4 people in the middle that are much more defined or filled in with color, and then, or not color but black and white, and then as we move further out, what we see are more line-esque type drawings or linear drawings. But yeah, it's definitely it does give that feeling of grandeur as well, I think, as much as what it does potentially, like everybody seems like, okay, we'll all go into the room and take a picture now and see can we get everybody in. Before we get Katrīna's actual response to it, I'm just going to read a little bit about what she says about it. So she says that these images are an attempt to introduce myself to a cast of seemingly colorful characters that have all ended up bound together forever in one rather small black and white photograph, living alongside the many other faces and places which are no longer family or familiar to me. There's an aged smell in the cupboard with the creaky door hinges, which is stuffed to the brim of our family albums through generations. Here, there's stories I have heard before and am able to recount. There's ones that seem vaguely familiar. Then there are those that I will never know to be told. The distance of time scattered the tree branches of our lives further apart from each other than one can ever imagine in their own lifetime. So, Katrīna, before we start to kind of figure out what we feel from it, what is your kind of take on Scatter using these pieces?
I was essentially inspired by, yes, this photograph that I found. It's quite small. It's tiny, really. It's smaller than the palm of your hand. And there's a few images that I've actually found that I've like been hoarding in a little pile to create future works from, because they just look so incredibly interesting and epic. And in the real photograph, it seems pretty obvious that it's kind of like a fancy dress party, because actually a lot of the people that are dressed up as men are women, and vice versa. There's like some men that are dressed up as women, and I have no idea who these people are. Like, and I have no one to ask. Like, my grandmother passed away a few years ago now, and although I remember her telling us about some images, they're the old ones, the black and white ones, and some stories, this particular one is a complete mystery to me. So it's fascinating that it's in this place in our house where we keep all our family albums, so obviously either these are at least friends, if not relations, of somebody at some point throughout history, but absolutely no idea. So that's just really fascinating how it doesn't take long to start forgetting, it's really, you're just a generation apart from essentially not knowing who were these people that were, you know, and taking a photograph at that time as well, like as you said, trying to gather them all together, like it was a big deal, you know, trying to make this thing last forever. And here we are in 2024, and who are they? What relation do they have to me?
Who knows? It's great though how a photograph can create such an archive of something. And I think even when there isn't an explanation to it, like what you've had to experience here, that you know, you are taking out details and information by what you just see in it. And I think when you go to sketch something like that, and when we see the color edition of this, it's really interesting to see how you kind of bring that to life, or put some definition on it, and start to give these characters essentially a lot of value, and you kind of put them in history and create a space for them.
I mean, the one thing I would say also is that, okay, maybe sure you don't know who they are, but they still sort of have an emotional impact on you, don't they? In a way, you're still connected to them in some way, even if you don't quite know how.
Yeah, definitely.
Powerful. It's sort of, yeah.
In my mind, I'm thinking that these are your ancestors in some form or other. But our memories are scattered, and we've lost. And you're talking about scatter as in lost memories, you know. And I think that's kind of a very unique way of looking at scatter. Really quite emotional, actually, because we all have ancestors and we all have lost memories of people.
Yeah, we all come from places and names. And another interesting thing that I'm not sure about this particular image, but one of the stories that I do remember that also made me drawn to capture this image was the story that we know in our family about, I mean, we've, again, even in these past generations, have moved. You know, I have a connection to Ireland, having lived there for 13 years around that. And there's the story how my great grandmother, she was like some countess's, like, I don't know what you'd call her, like her maiden, the person who dressed her and was like her number one lady essentially. And she moved with her to Sweden. And in Sweden she met a man, not only from her same hometown, so Jelgava, but like the same street, so where I live now.
Wow.
Where I'm now in Latvia, in Jelgava. And they fell in love and they got married and they moved back to Latvia. But we were like this close to being part Swedish. You know what I mean? Like she moved to Sweden. And that happened, you know, again, that's only a couple of years of, so that whole concept of scatter, of how like essentially impermanent, you know, these borders and divisions and countries are in a way. Because I mean, you know, ourselves as well. Eamonn, you're in London now. You know, how long will you be there? Where will you end up? I don't know, somewhere in Brisbane 20 years from now? Like, who knows?
Who knows? Who knows?
I'm not thinking that far ahead.
It is funny though when you think about, it's not necessarily funny, but it's interesting how our legacy has changed as a result of the different cultures that we may have been a part of, or that our history or heritage has been a part of, and how they, especially I suppose from Ireland, where a lot of people has migrated or emigrated from there for potentially a better life in some states, in some cases, and as a result a lot of people have so many different connections to different countries all over the world, and we are really all intertwined in some way. There is a color version of this piece, but yet they're two. Am I right in saying, Katrīna, that they are two separate pieces?
I mean, I view it as a sort of diptych. It's made in a technique that I happened upon while I was doing my MFA in Belfast. And so I've done similar pieces like this before, where I create one in just with pencil, grayscale, black and white, yeah. And then the other one is, and it's mostly, yeah, focusing on the outlines. And then the other image is like the color without the outline. So think of what happens when you lose the line in a cartoon, you're just left with these color fields. But what I've never done before for this duo of pieces is that I never worked with a black and white image before. So I had to imagine the colors for the second. So I'd say the colored version is actually a work in progress because I have reworked it. The first time around, I painted it more loosely and then I reworked it, and I kind of foresee the future of this piece as continuing to evolve.
Nice work, actually. I like the painting and the drawing.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think the quality of the painting is almost even more engaging than the black and white pencil, because you're trying to fill in the blanks and you're trying to kind of see what's going on, and you can clearly see that there's some sort of gathering that's happening, but trying to just fill in the gaps and make up the story, making it relevant to everybody has a memory of sitting around a table at home, and I think that's something that can be interpreted in everyone's situation, regardless of whether there was 5 people or 6 people, 100 people, or 1 person. Everyone has that kind of memory, and I think the fact that this isn't even a scattering, this is a gathering. I think that's quite cool.
Your color choice, your palette, was completely taken from your head, I presume. Because you have nothing to go with, but is very old worldy.
Yes,
if that's possible. Yes. Is that, yeah. So.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the painting. I like the painting a lot. I like the little touches. I like the moustache. I think it's pretty nice on the guy sitting on the right hand side. If it's a guy or if it's a woman dressed as him, I don't mind. But it sort of puts it in its. I agree with Anne that it does look sort of old, 19th century. Even the painting, even it doesn't have a lot of say the same amount of details as the drawing, but it still gets across the age of the piece, and the color of the shutter and the pink beside it. That's very sort of Matisse-like. I like
Yes.
that too.
Yeah.
So I think it's nicely done, the painting. I don't know if you're still working on it, Katrīna, or not, or is it complete or finished? Or
I actually like, Katrīna, if you don't mind me saying, I actually like the way it is now. I think to go at it again, maybe overworking it, I think it says enough in the way it is, and the looseness of it is really fabulous. Like, there's a freedom of the lack of line, so nothing is contained, and I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I would sort of agree with that, actually. That, I mean, I was looking at some of her friends did a painting the other day, and she showed me an early version. It was great, and then the final version was I didn't say it to her, but I thought it was overworked. It killed the spontaneity and the immediacy of the earlier version. So I like it as it is, actually.
We always have that issue as artists as to knowing when to stop. Knowing when we reach the point that is like, okay, this is done, and accepting it for that.
It also reminds me of, the old photographs that were tinted afterwards. Yeah, there's a touch of that about it, which is interesting also.
Yeah, I love those images. And what I like doing is I've done it with this image as well, and it's available to view on my Patreon, but I've done it with my experiments before as well, where I kind of create the pencil layer less saturated and like transparent, and then I put the colored version under it. And obviously, because I paint them as I create them as 2 separate, they're on 2 separate sheets, like 2 separate, and I just kind of freehand. I don't use a grid or anything. They don't quite align, because each time they're made just with what I see with my eyes afresh. So it's kind of like a secret third artwork that can also be created using this technique. So I'm a big fan of doing this again with other images. And
that'd be
take
cool.
your feedback, guys. I'll try to calm down and not touch it.
Yeah. I think that's really good, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of that. This particular piece, what material did you use for this, Katrina, just to give
The
people an
colored
idea?
version,
Yes.
the colored is gouache paint, which I really like. Yeah, it has that, like, it's watery, it can be drippy, it remains being able to reactivate it as opposed to like watercolor. You can also sort of a little bit layer it, yeah, with it's really, and it dries relatively quickly. So it's like a joy to work with.
Okay, so this brings us nicely onto Anne's work, and the first of Anne's pieces. We have two pieces in this collection by Anne. It's called This Dark World We Live In, and it is of course by Anne Martin Walsh. From what I see in this, it is there's multiple colors in it, but quite dark tones. The only thing that's kind of really stark or white is three individuals that are towards the bottom of the art piece. It looks as though there is kind of like an overlay or some sort of multi-layered overlays across each different element of the piece, so that there's kind of translucency between the different layers. You can see that in the bottom left there are kind of like more rich linear textures that are kind of like lines, and then as you go up along the left hand side of it, you can see a little bit of light that's kind of coming in through the kind of an orangey ambery color. And yeah, I think that's kind of what I immediately see anyway.
Yeah, the three clearly visible figures do appear to be young, so mostly children, and then the one that's on more of the left corner, age is unknown, but it's the one that seems the more distraught from the facial expressions and mouth open wide and possibly crying, screaming. It is a darker toned work. There's a lot of blacks and grays, but there's actually a surprising amount of color as well, seeping through all of the dark parts. There's yellows and blues and reds and oranges and different a variety of shades as well in those, also all of the tones. And the mark making that is predominantly, I'd say, around the perimeter, but it kind of is worked through the entirety of the piece, is very indicative of kind of sharp, quick movements, perhaps.
Yeah.
I thought it was very inspired by what's happening in the world now. I mean, I just kept thinking of what's happening in Gaza, the genocide of the Palestinian people. That's what came to mind when I saw it, when I thought the images were similar to photos you'd see of the aftermath of an Israeli bombardment. And also thought of other paintings like Picasso's Guernica, which is about the anguish and the suffering caused by, well, that was the Germans bombing the Basque town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. So yeah, I thought it was political, I thought, and very clearly inspired by what's happening in the world today. In particular, the woman seems to be looks like the woman holding the child. Probably could be somebody from Palestine, or as we speak, Lebanon or Syria, or somewhere in the Middle East. Anyway, so I thought it was pretty deliberately directing us to look at what's happening in the world and to just call it out and say it for what it is. The destruction of a lot of people, and not. I mean, it's women and children here, but a lot of men too. I mean, they always say that in the reports. They always give the number of women and children, but I mean, men as well are being killed. Anyway, so yeah, a powerful piece, I thought. I was going to ask you, Anne, how big is it? What are the dimensions of the piece?
It's 90 by 90 centimeters. It's on canvas.
Okay. So. And it's acrylic, is it, or?
It's mixed media, because it's
mixed media.
Yeah, there's acrylic and there's collage and there's
Right.
transfer print, and you're right, those people that you're looking at, and there's actually 4 in all. There's a baby and its mother, there's a young girl to the foreground, and there's over to the other side of her, there's Lost in the background. There's a screaming young girl.
Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
So they're actually, I used found images to transfer, and they're actual people from Palestine. And I said, for me to bring the reality of it was to bring the real people into the piece, you know. And for me, that made the piece extremely strong, extremely political. Yes,
Mm.
you're right. It is a very strong political piece. Going like that it has ended up a very strong political piece. It started out about war, but and it could have been any war, but it focused in on the one that I find is horrifying.
Mhm. I think the immediate response or the immediate feeling that I get from looking at this piece is that war, the anguish, the pain, the suffering. You know, there is an immediate sense, even without looking at the expressions on any of the 4 individuals that you have, you generate that feeling of destruction. And even in the amber colors and the oranges and that, or that flaming fiery that real anger. It just there's a massive sense of anger, which potentially is resonating from what your anger is towards this situation, and then the reaction of, or the documentation part of this really is what, as you said, the people that you have placed at the front and center um, of this artwork, which is incredibly moving, but also very, very scary.
You know, one of the original ideas for the show was to call it diaspora, and that often refers to the Jewish diaspora. And the fact that it's the Jewish diaspora who is now, you know, been given a homeland in what was once Palestine, that it's sort of ironic that they are now causing another diaspora. You know, they're scattering of people, literally, in Palestine and Lebanon now. They're blowing people to bits, really. And there's a lot of people, you know, there's Palestinian migrants in Dublin now, actually. You know, so it's creating one former scat diaspora is creating another diaspora.
Yeah, in the making of this, though, I wasn't thinking of the people that got out. I'm thinking of the people that are there. So if you hear the drones coming, and you know there's going to be bombs dropped, you scatter.
So these are the sentiments that Anne puts with this beautiful piece. It goes, "This dark world we live in. Scatter because you have no choice. Scatter at the rat-a-tat-tat of gunfire. Scatter at the sight of the enemy. Scatter with the boom of bombs. Scatter in hope of safety. Scatter to seek shelter. Scatter to live. Scatter." There's so much imagery even in your writing. It does help the viewer, not that the viewer needs help to what you're trying to say here in this piece, but I think it definitely works incredibly well together.
Yeah, I really appreciate the text as part of it. I think it's better than any, you know, artist statement could be. Just a poetic accompaniment with the visual. So I'd say it's like an intrinsic part of the work. It would be nice if it was somewhere on the back of it or something. I always like so purchasing work that has some ephemera, you know, attached to the back, like the poetry or images that inspire the artist. So I'd say it's definitely a lovely addition, and it's worthwhile to keep them together.
Yeah, I agree.
Good idea.
And we'll move to your next piece, which is slightly different. Let's just do our quick interpretation of what we see in the piece. So it's called Trail, by, of course, Anne Martin Walsh, and it looks to me as though it is a print Figuratively, there is what looks like a snail, and the snail shell with a lot of people that are kind of coming out of it.
Well, the people coming out of the shell seem to be sort of standing on the shell, or I mean, but yeah, I like the sort of greeny blue of the actual shell of the snail when contrasted with the grayscale of the rest of the piece. So visually, it's not. I think it works. It works well. The color combination works well.
I've actually just before you mentioned the snail is when I noticed that it was a snail, because at first I was like the greens and the blues, kind of like planet Earth, and because it's predominantly covered up by these sort of floating and also standing some on the top of this sphere. It does look like they're kind of, you know, covering up it visually. So, but like the colors make you do think of a stereotypical globe, even though
Yes.
you can see that it's actually a spiral of the blue and the green. And so they kind of spiral out of the center and the lines become thicker. And then I realized that there is a snail's body holding up the sphere. So it's actually not just, you know, planet Earth with all these figures surrounding it. And the ground is sort of completely pitch black that the snail is moving on. And then all of the space surrounding the snail and the figures is white.
I'm sorry I ruined the surprise for you, Katrina. Before we get Anne to talk about it, this is what she says about it. Snails carry their shell throughout life, giving them affiliation with travel, shelter, security, adaptation, and autonomy, self-directing freedom and independence. This work is in reference to the migration trail, the scattering of people all over the world who are searching for what the snail represents. So Anne, tell us, why snails?
Well, I think it's what the snail represents, really,
Yes.
that came to mind big time. And the fact that they can bring their home with them. So no matter where they are, they have a home. You know, I'd like to think that was for people as well, that no matter where they end up, they would have a home. Be they forced to travel or not forced, be they, you know, whatever their circumstances. But also, your Katrina was very clever in that she saw the globe, and I think the snail shell, and I thought the colors, the green and the blue, are very Earth representation, you know, colors. So it is like the world, but also it is the snail shell. But the people, it's also they're traveling on the back maybe of the snail. They're hitching a ride, like a boat, like a, you know, the several things that it represented. But it basically was about civil rights. The whole thing is about civil rights and the right for people to be. I mean, when we look at our own history as Irish people and how we are all over the world, you know, and have for centuries now traveled all over the world due to necessity and just because we wanted to. But we had a right. We weren't always treated nice, and the same is happening now. People aren't being treated nice, and that's, for me, sad. But this is it's kind of a lighter version about the same topic. It's about being forced to travel, and your right, what your rights are as your autonomy, your right, your civil rights.
Looks a little bit like a sort of a ship as well in the sea, a snail, like one of those Viking ships or something. I just remind, you know, so it reminded me of people, you know, trying to scurrying across the English Channel or down from North Africa to Spain, and, you know, falling out of their vessels in a desperate attempt to flee whether it's poverty or conflict. So it you know, it reminded me of that as well. So yeah, but again, I think it's just as a visual piece, I think it works very well. I like it.
And I see you have, is there three?
Three editions, yes.
No, it's fantastic. Like the stripes as well. I mean, everything you look at it and kind of it has so much double meaning, and the use of also the kind of animal figure as a storyteller for the human experience as well, and how we're all united. And even like looking at the ground as well, I'm kind of fighting my own feelings. At first I was like, oh, it's like, you know, this black destroyed earth that the snail is moving on. But then I'm like, hang on, actually black earth, black soil is like the most valuable thing, you know, in like agriculture. And snails as well. Like I know from my own experience, my mother constantly fighting them in the garden. They're kind of seen as pests, but yet here it is sort of like this saving arc for all these human images on it. So there's a lot of meaning that you can instill in this work. I love it. I think it's great.
Now, Anne, see, your snail carries so much.
Thank you.
It's really great. It's really great, Anne. And just for those of you at home who want to know the size, it's 42 by 42 centimeters. It's a colographic print with ink and acrylic on Fabriano. And there is, as Katrina suggests, this is one of 3 prints. And are these the other editions of the prints? Are they colored the same way, or have they got other interpretations? Or
they're, because they're all hand manipulated, obviously, because they're hand colored. Each one is varied anyway, because each one is inked and scribbled and printed. So so they're all each one is unique. So
you really are getting an original piece, even though there are, as it's one of 3 in this series of Anne's work. Okay, so we're going to just move now on to Caoimhe Heaney, and Caoimhe Heaney has this photographic piece. It is called Perish, and so really quickly we will just have a quick identification of what we see in the literal sense here. So Katrina, do you want to kickstart us off here?
So it is a vertical image appearing to be almost entirely black dark, with a central circle that's light, made out of possibly a few dots. And then inside of the circle is an image of a close-up of a rose from the side. And it appears to be like the petals are dripping a little bit, and you can't see the stem of the rose. It sort of disappears into the background.
It's very like it's caught in chiaroscuro, is it? Is that how you pronounce it? Lighting. So it's like it's a photographic image. It looks like cut in that type of lighting, chiaroscuro lighting, which is a very old way of photographing as well. So I think it's the drip, the way it's manipulated so that the petals look like they're dripping gold nearly. The rose looks goldish in color, and they look like they're dripping gold.
Just to say that it did remind me a little bit of sort of surrealist work, like Dali sort of things. Yeah, interesting work.
So Caoimhe says that Perish is a piece of work that explores the idea of how, as we grow, we must sometimes release the old to become what we are meant to be. We must shed our old self to embrace evolution. Here we see the white rose dissolve and shed its old petals. We see here the beauty in these transition periods. So yeah, I think what you've all said in the literal kind of description of it, especially the kind of that stark contrast of light and dark, the chiaroscuro, which is like, you know, it is traditional painting technique that was very popular by Renaissance artists. And so you do get that real old feeling of it, and the kind of that sense of traditionalism in it, and then bringing in that sort of Dali feeling, as John, you suggested, it does kind of give a really kind of modern interpretation of that, but it's losing something. It's losing life, or it's starting to kind of, it feels like there's a weight on it and it's been dropped down or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite dramatic. It's quiet drama, because it's sort of still and centered, and yet the dripping of the petals, and even though it is a white rose, it's looks more kind of like a natural white, as opposed to, some roses are like this very artificial looking white. They almost don't look real. This one, I love that you can see all the veins of it and like the green leaves just like under the flower bulb, and a bit of the leaves surrounding the stem.
And I think you're right. I think it does have a sense of quietness to it. I really like that.
It's the scattering of parts of you that you have to let go of.
Move on to Josh's piece. So here we have the first. So Josh, it's one piece, but much like a lot of his works, this is where there is the UV light injunction that you would use to see the different variations of the artwork, and it has that interactivity with it. So this piece is called number 332, Pebbles. From what we see, literally, it's like a very, very colorful, multicolored piece. It's square. It has kind of like a build of a similar pattern that goes across the painting, and it's, it feels like there's a lot of structure in it.
Yes, it's seemingly quite descriptive in the title of it. Yes, all the individual shapes are more rectangular than round, but like with rounded corners a bit. And they vary in width and length. There's every color probably, from the rainbow. I see lots of yellows and blues and pinks and purples and oranges and light greens. There's sort of larger sized forms, with kind of mixed in with smaller rectangular forms.
So Josh puts a statement with this that states, when does random become pattern? When does the pattern recognize itself? As a simple kind of connection to this piece. And what do you think that he means by that?
When I look at it, and you say it gave me the title of it, I'm thinking pebbles, and I'm thinking the beach, pebble beach, and I'm thinking the multicolored stones on a pebble beach, and the varying sizes. In that it's a pebble beach in itself, there's a pattern, even though everything minutely broken down is individual. Together they form the pattern.
I think that first thing, as you were saying that and connecting that to the beach and connecting that to pebbles, and I just think of that exercise where you skip petals across the water, and how it hops along the current. I think that that's kind of, how that scatters out. I think that's quite interesting. This is the alternative image of this with UV light. So it is just one piece, and the piece is 90 by 90 centimeters using UV metallic, iridescent and fluorescent acrylics on canvas. A lighter energy, I suppose, to the collection of scatter.
I think there's like one really piece that's sort of in a different direction than all the other ones amongst all the elongated rectangular figures. And then there's kind of one that's sort of questioningly possibly trying to be more square. But that also sense of movement that you get from all of the rectangles facing kind of the same direction, and the title as well makes you think of a river, possibly a moving body of water.
I think this is also kind of gives a sense of day and night, whereas the night looks more like water and more like a kind of a full-on water piece.
When I'm looking at especially the night, what you're calling the UV version or the night version, I would have called it, I can see human forms in it, very much so, all over it, lost in the pebbles or lost in them. I can see all these human forms start much more obvious. Now, it's to do with how the paint was applied, I presume, or that, but it's coming through for me in this piece that's seen now, very strong. So
I suppose that's how the UV light kind of almost swallows some of the brighter colors, so that it connects some more of the pebbles together. I see that as well. I see lots of kind of people just connect together, almost kind of as if you're looking at like a crowd wash, or kind of like in a really dense city where you have lots of people at like peak time in the end of the day, rushing home for work and trampling on each other almost.
Or we all just like pebbles.
Yes, we're all just like pebbles. So we'll go to Lucy's piece here. This is called 24, and each of these pieces are called 24. This is the kind of red version of her trio. It has another energy to it that some of the others have in a different way. But you see lots of people again, much like what Josh has done in his piece. You see that real vibrant red color that's kind of quite fiery in the background. You can feel the warmth in it. There's probably hundreds of faces within that black and white element of it.
Simply drawn, circular, round, kind of smiley face shaped human faces, just with the eyes and the mouth seemingly mostly open, as I can tell. Mostly the mouth seem open. And then they're done in just like a black on a white, so presumably marker or pen. And then with the red drips, if you turn it one way, it could be dripping. But then I'm also kind of looking at it as one of those illusion images. And me, the faces sort of appear like trees, like birch trees in a red. When you like concentrate on the faces more than the red drip. So that's also a bit trippy.
Triggers. What do you think, Anne?
The vivid red kept standing out for me. And then I'm going, did that happen before the people? And then when I initially looked at the people, it looked like skulls rather than faces. Is it something to do with migration? There's depth. The red is behind, as far as I'm concerned, not on top. And the people are breaking out but in strips for some reason. So it's like, like are the people the drips?
What I saw a minute ago, I don't see anymore.
Sorry.
I see. I can't get the birch trees out of my head, and I can't now figure out whether the red is behind or in front. So it's just
trippiness of it, and you're right, Katrina. It's kind of a trippy piece. It is.
This is what Lucy has to say. So Lucy Lambe states, "When I think of scattering, my mind immediately goes to the moment before, when the dispersal is imminent, the last fleeting second of together." These pieces were created with the forced dispersal of peoples in mind, the herding of families and communities from one place to another, and the horror of the unknown, the hope of refuge, but the knowledge of a dangerous journey ahead of an uncertain future, of scattering within an enforced boundary at the orders of an oppressor. One of the words, or one of the kind of statements she says there, is about the knowledge of a dangerous journey ahead. And I kind of think, immediately looking at their expression, as you pointed out earlier, Katrina, they're kind of the open mouth, the kind of like, the gasp of what's about to come on, or what they're about to experience. And sometimes when we get that gasp, it's an immediate response to something that's happening quite imminently. So I suppose, that's kind of the immediacy of this piece puts it into dangerous territory.
It's such an unusual juxtaposition of, obviously the seriousness of the work and the statement that accompanies it, and yet the technique and the representation of, at first glance, it's like, oh, like smiley faces, like, the simple circle at dots for eyes. And then the more you look at it, it's actually quite horrifying.
Hold that thought and look at this one, which takes the red out and saturates the negative space with more scariness, with more people that feel scared. And I potentially maybe this is the first of the three rather than the second of the three, and how it kind of starts to dissipate or starts to dilute. This piece here that we're looking at now, it's more rectangular as a horizontal landscape piece, and all of the red has disappeared, and we're now left with just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of open faces.
Again, the open mouths also could be interpreted as, it's just a large choir. It's a large choir of people singing. But then when you see how many of the faces there are, and all the individual smaller expressions, it becomes kind of unsettling for me. These works are really, once you look into them, they're very, very powerful in there. They pack a punch with the kind of simplicity in a way, but oof.
I've been just reading a book about Chenko, the Japanese how camps the women were held in, and like the overcrowding and how they were all squeezed into small places and when they had to sleep at night, they couldn't roll over, they couldn't touch, they couldn't roll on top of each other, and even breathing was difficult. So, and this is like singing it to me, it's that corralled feeling, that overcrowding.
I just immediately went straight to Nazi Germany, where you think of the people that were kind of, put into big camps, and where the gas chambers, and trying to think about how people were compressed into that space. And I suppose thinking of it today in our kind of war-torn society now, we have similar kind of echoes of that claustrophobia, and that tightness, I think, of so many people pushed together
into a small space.
Yeah. This piece is, again, similarly to the previous one, this is a hand drawing, it's pen on paper, as simple as that. And I think this final piece then of Lucy's, again, also called 24, it's yellow, it has a yellow background, and it has our faces again, but the mouths are gone. There is no mouths in these little bobbleheads that are all around the piece. But what we do have at the bottom of this vertical piece are bodies that are clothed with black. And they could potentially be just like kind of like dresses or capes or something that is just covering the kind of from the neck to the knees. A major difference in this piece to the others is that the mouth is missing.
I think in this piece, right, it's more about the danger is still there. You see a little bit of red, and the masses have been silenced, basically, and especially when you put it with the other two pieces.
There is a real narrative arc between these three pieces, and interesting to see what order you would put them in, because if you had all three pieces, how you would kind of align them to tell different stories, and how you could potentially get your voice back, or how it's peeled away, or how it's positioned. You can create the story. This piece is definitely kind of like, it's the voiceless choir of people who have been taken captive, or potentially who are, even if you take away the war element of it, or the politics, you could think about the hierarchy in society, who have all the voice and the masses don't, or how different classes mightn't have as much to say as others. Yes, that's Lucy's work, and again, we can look at all of those pieces on nuacollective.com, so do check them out. We're going on to John's work now, John Murray, and this is the first piece. It's called Scatter. What we see here is a collage of different color tones. It's kind of almost like they started with one color and then rolled on another color and then rolled on a third color. The first is kind of multi kind of like a pink pigment with like yellow going through it a little, and then there's black, and then there's red. It's landscape in shape, and but yet it's kind of all framed into the center of the piece, into a more square orientation. What do we think?
Very loose strokes, pinks, the blacks, the reds. I can see it scattered paint. An odd, strong, maybe brush stroke, but not a lot of strong brush stroke. So a different application of paint, maybe splattered and that as well. So
I see quite a few faces, even though, from what I understand, reading about the work, the way that it was created, would really render only abstract imagery. The see-through layers of some of the pinks and yellows, especially on the bottom right corner, top left corner with the blues and the whites, sort of reminds me of confetti and something happy, but yet the dramatic black and red all over that is kind of, again, being very violent.
John says about all three pieces that we're about to see, he says, when working on a large, usually idea-based painting, I typically use large amounts of acrylic paint. On finishing a session, I often have large amounts of paint left over, which I apply to smaller surfaces in order to A, not waste the paint, and B, enjoy applying paint while without the pressure of converting an idea into a painting. I playfully scatter the paint that happens to be on the palette on smaller surfaces, being guided by the emerging colors, patterns, and forms. The painting is complete when it appears done. So these scattergun paintings are offshoots of more conceptual works that are equally valid outworkings of an initial idea. I get that kind of sense of waste not, want not, but at the same time, what he's created here is a really interesting image and representation of bloodshed. I think that's kind of what I get immediately from it. And maybe because of the black and red heart contrast over what potentially could be a flowering bed underneath it, I immediately feel like this is kind of like this: a beautiful land has been destroyed and been harshly destroyed by the very fast and furious straight lines, roll out brushstrokes that are overlapping what is potentially a very specific pinpointed painting below.
Yeah.
The second piece in this is this one, and it's a little more it's a little less intense. It has a lot more pink, but it's kind of like a light pink color, and then it seems to be on a white sheet, and it is in vertical orientation, and there are lighter, less intense black ink markings across it.
Again, some images pop out to me, even though it is meant to be abstract.
Mhm.
The sharpness of the lines as well.
Yeah, it's so angular. And the third piece of John's submission to this collection is instead of the black mark making that we saw in the previous one, there are the red ones. So this kind of is almost like a dissection of the first piece, where there's the bottom layer is that pink color with the speckle in it, and the red and the black together. We've now got two pieces where we've just red and then we've just black. So we kind of see the dissection of the layers.
Also, I think that they are abstract, and we can't help ourselves but to try and search for, something in it.
Yeah.
But they are actually abstract at the end of the day, and I suppose then I'm talking about the taking from the color more than anything, and the violence of the first one that you showed, black and red. That's quite harsh, where these are gentler pieces, even red and pink. If the one we're looking at now, I still consider that to be quite a gentle piece, not as harsh at all. And maybe it's the black that makes it really. Black is very difficult. It's a difficult color.
It is. It's often quite defining and strict. It has those elements of definition. And I think you're right that the abstract doesn't need the framework that we're trying to pinpoint into. And I think what John has achieved here is that, we need to strip things back and just not think about putting a label on everything, I suppose.
But the absence of black to me, in this particular piece, the scatter too, I don't know, the red, maybe it's because it's late, but all I see is a body bag. Like the line of, the kind of where the red is missing.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I'm getting all sorts of very strong and violent imagery from these. And I love pink and red.
So that's John's work, and they are all made with acrylic, and they're all on paper. And this last piece that we've just seen is 30 by 30 centimeters. So we'll move on now to Robert Jackson's piece, and as big as it looks here on the screen, it's actually considerably smaller, as famously done by Robert Jackson. So this piece, it showcases a sky. The sky is much bluer at the top, and it goes into lighter tones as you gradually go down the piece, although at the very base there is kind of the element of maybe black clouds, so potentially suggesting rain coming on. And then in the center to the right there is a kind of an oval shape, almost like an eye, with a kind of a yellowy kind of coloring around it that's potentially the reflection of the sun coming through the clouds. and it's rectangular in shape, and the brushstrokes are quite neat, and it looks as dainty as the size.
The shape of the colorful clouds as well sort of looks kind of like an eye, like an Egyptian eye of Osiris or whoever. I'm not a huge Egyptologist, but you know the eyeliner that goes like the eye, and then they have like
Yes.
the eyeliner.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of contrast as well between the highlights and just a smidge of dark points in the lower right corner. The scale of it is just, I can't stop looking at the picture of Robert holding the painting in his fingers.
It's absolutely tiny. What do you think, Anne?
Well, I know how small it is. I've seen the photograph of him holding it, and I know he does a lot of work on brass as well. I don't know, is this one brass?
Yeah, this one's oil on brass plate.
Yeah, and I find that intriguing in itself, the miniature pieces he does. But I think the colors are very gentle in this, and I saw it as a portal when I looked at it, even though it's about clouds, but I see a portal into a different sky nearly, you know, because I think the blue in what I'd be calling the portal seems slightly different than the shades of blue around. It's drawing me in. I think it's about the different types of clouds in the sky and reflections from the sun and the scattering of clouds as well. You know, and for me, I when I saw this piece, I immediately thought of your mind going into different places, the scattering of your mind into different places, basically through portals in your head.
I think as you speak that I see the kind of divide, so it is almost like there's half and half above the portal and below the portal, and to see that. That's really interesting. And just to kind of say what Rob has said about this, so he says, the skies are very different where I now live in Fife than they were while growing up in Waterford and Dublin. This year in Scotland, we were fortunate to witness Narcarius clouds over several days. Narcarius clouds occur when very small particles of ice formed high in the Earth's atmosphere scatter the light from the sun to produce unreal ethereal, oily, iridescent portal-like shapes in the sky at dawn and at dusk. They are hard to describe and surreal to experience. This painting is number 25 in a series of Tiny Skies paintings that I am producing, capturing the clouds above me in my new environment. What you've just said, Anne, with regards to the portal, he has described that here in his statement, and I think it's interesting to kind of reflect on the movement of the atmosphere and how that has changed, how that changes and therefore scatters. What do you think, Katrina?
I think it's a very peaceful piece in contrast with a lot of the works in this collection.
Yes,
and
definitely has that hope feeling about it.
Yes, and it's again going back to the scale. I can just imagine it being on a wall in your house, in a gallery, and obviously you can't see it unless you come up close to it and inspect it. Now, I've rarely experienced works of such small scale, but from what I'm imagining is that you kind of enter into the world then more because of this shorter distance that you have to have with the work. So it's kind of like this glimmer of hope, if you will, amongst, you know, reality.
It's there, you just have to find it. And I think that's what he always wants to do with all of his miniature pieces. And I think similarly to what we want to do in the world, we need to find the hope. And we know it's there, but we have to find it. We have to get it. This piece is by Robert Jackson. It's 4 by 6 centimeters. It's tiny. And as said, it is oil on brass plates. Okay, we'll move on to Saoirse's piece now. This is very, very similar to her other works in the color palette, which is so vibrant. You can see the really high contrasting colors. There is a roadway that's leading into the distance, and there's a kind of a spiral road that's going up into a different direction. On the left, you can see kind of maybe more land. It could be kind of a grass area, or it could be some sort of just off the beaten track potentially on the left. And there's a fence in the in the mid distance, which looks potentially like something you would see on a farm. And the sky, from the base of the sky going up to the top of the sky, it looks like the sun is setting potentially. And it does have that kind of that dusky feeling about it.
And there's possibly a tiny figure of a dog on the right side on top of the mountain under the wiring on the electrical poles. Maybe I'm imagining, but on the road, it seems like there could be shadows of human figures, but then I'm not sure if I see any human figures within like the image on the right side. But that's what
I see the dog that you're speaking about around the poles. I do think that, yeah, that's quite interesting because I only see that now that you say it. And potentially I also see a car coming around the corner with the two yellow dots. Do you see that?
Yeah.
What do you think, Anne?
Yeah, I think, well, I think, yes, I can potentially see that there's some traffic on that road, basically, about to appear.
Yes.
And yes, there's animals as you go up the hill, up that road. I think there's more than one animal, maybe. For me, this is talking about travel, leaving or coming home. It doesn't matter. It's about motion. So that could be the motion of having to leave. You know, even single one of us had to leave home and move out and move off, or it could be coming back home, you know, from travels, or it could be, like you were saying, the shadows. You see shadows of people on the road. I know what you're talking about when I look at that, Katrina, because in the blues it looks like, yeah, but
absolutely
they're absorbed by the road nearly. People along, you know, fall by the way, and the for me that just could say the tiredness of having to move, having to travel, having to be on the road.
It's almost like looking behind, as though the perspective is us looking behind rather than us looking at. And you can see those people that are laid behind on the road, and the car that's behind us, and the dog that's behind us, and the two different pathways that are behind us that we chose in order to take the road that's moving forward.
There's sort of a sense of the unknown as well, because the road is kind of going around the corner, and the possible visible headlights and everything is just framed and sort of just about out of view, you know? It's sort of there, but you're not quite sure of the entire story.
This piece is an oil and acrylic on canvas, much like Saoirse tends to kind of use mixed media of different paints in her works, and it is 35 by 45 centimeters. We now move on to my piece, which is called To Reconnect.
So there's an array of colors used, from white to black. There's pinks even and oranges, predominantly a lot of blues and greens, especially in the center of the image. There seems to be, I see 4 human figures moving sort of from left to right, with the one on the very left being like the taller, larger one, more in the red oranges, and then a shorter figure with a white head, and then a more bluey figure and another more blue one, but they're more abstract. They're kind of like the general shape of a human body with, you know, the geometrical circular heads, and you can kind of see outlines of shoulders, and they seemingly blend in with what to me looks kind of like a wave of water, but because it is abstract, it's kind of created by the technique that was used, so it's really open to interpretation. But I see the human figures definitely, and the wave motion, and then there's some other geometrical shapes, like maybe like a tower or elongated cliff way in the background, kind of towards center right. And then there's also a circle with a gold, it appears to me gold or yellow dot in the very middle that could also signify a planet or another maybe figure's head. There's a lot of movement in the work, and there's a lot of colors. So they're quite, I'm going to use the word very popular now on the internet, demure. They're not too overpowering. They're not like too toned down. There's a balance between the brightest brights, the darkest darks, and the lightest lights.
I can see the figures quite clearly, and there's movement in the figures, but it's like it's not so much the water, but it's like it's fog, or they're coming through some mist or vapor, you know, coming out of something and towards something, but I'm not quite sure what. Or I think
do you see the flag, Anne?
the flag?
Yeah.
Over to the right? No, where? Like
kind of the third figure from left to right, like the bit of red with black outline.
Yes, there. Yes.
Overness of kind of the figure kind of looks like the figure is carrying a flag that's been torn. That's like red, orange.
Yeah, or is it for me maybe that again, this is an abstract work. So what am I doing? I'm allowing it to be abstract, but I can see figures quite clearly. But like to me, that dot of red is where they're coming from.
Oh,
right. So that's the hellfire or the horrible or the bad, and they're coming out of that through this mist and in a maybe travel by sea, yes, maybe water, maybe there was a lot of things involved, but they're moving away from that red, which for me a lot of the time is, well, people associate red with danger a lot of the time, so they're moving away from that and they're getting away from it.
I'm finding that it's a very clever thing to actually create an image that is more abstract in such a way, because it really makes you look at it more, and it makes you consider like all the possibilities that we've come up with. And it could be so differently interpreted by whatever state of mind you are and your connotations with things and symbols. So there's a lot of room for discussion here. There's a lot of depth, like quite obviously, literally, with the use of the tones and the colors and the dark playing with the lights. Yeah, like I see flags and Anne sees essentially a very kind of negative, dark place, yeah, that they're coming from, kind of pish. So it's very...
It's small. They've escaped, basically. They've got away, you know.
What size is this? How big is this?
It's 100 by 80 centimeters.
Oh, okay.
Size.
So it's not
What's
huge.
That? Medium.
It's mixed media. There's a lot of oil in there. But there's kind of the more mattier kind of textures that you see, that's acrylic. And any of the kind of more textural side of it, there's kind of like a mix between like modeling paste and that kind of stuff to kind of really brighten out those whites. I
bet you can see that in real life even better, the difference of textures, the matte, the oily parts.
You can, and it's definitely more shiny. I think it's really interesting to hear your interpretation of this, and I think the original this piece was originally done in 2014, and recently for this exhibition I decided to completely destroy it, for the want of a better word. But I reconnected with it because beforehand it was a separation of individuals, and it was a kind of a breakdown of different people, and potentially that red space that Anne's referring to, or the flag, actually kind of has kind of similar connotations, because the flag is sometimes a represents a community or represents a place. The fact that it's torn and the fact that it's small and it's almost over the shoulder and facing behind
Yeah.
would mean that it's been left behind, it's gone. It's not, it's that torn, and it's the scale of it is quite small, so it is in the past.
Yes.
And they're not looking at it, and it's not presented to us, it's presented behind us. And then the water and the elements and the air and the movement, I suppose, is all just to kind of create that atmosphere of that it is in progress, it is moving, and you're just getting through it. Maria's work, she has two mixed media photographs for this collection called Scatter, one location being from Greystones in Ireland, and which is in the foreground, which is the opaque tree, and in the background what we see is a photograph of New York, USA, and both in 2024. It is grayscale. It is it's quite neatly aligned so that the tree is very much central, and it's almost like there's an inverse reflection of the tree. There's a mirror image of the tree, one going to the left, one going to the right, and you can see the kind of core. And then you see the city of New York in the background, and you can see the water and the sky, and a very cloudy sky.
It's hard to come into here, like, because what she's written about it is going through my head.
Yes.
I and I know where she was coming from when she was making the piece because of that. It's hard not, like, you're right, you have described it perfectly. It's very symmetric.
Yes, I think that's a great word for it. It is very symmetric.
Which is maybe unusual in art, in that you very rarely get something dead center. I find it's quite peaceful. It's making the two places, say, where she is left and where she is gone to, united in a way, that she hasn't really left one and fully behind, that she's brought a lot of it with her. And I think if we all travel and leave, like, even from Tipperary to Wexford, I take a bit of Tipperary with me,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's what this is saying very strongly, that you might have gone somewhere different, but you bring a lot of where your original home was with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely. What do you think, Katrina?
The symmetry of the kind of see-through and disappearing trees in the foreground is well balanced with more uneven symmetry from the background image of the skyline. So I'm glad that it's not completely rigidly symmetrical, like a very fake produced kind of image. You can tell that this was human made. And I'm imagining this as a view when you're looking out onto a landscape or a place where you are, and you have these memories of where you come from playing in your mind in the background. So this overlay, to me also as somebody who's moved around a lot, seems familiar. And then the more I keep looking at this image as well, I'm seeing just kind of other symbols emerge from the branches intertwining, like in the very center, just above the line of the horizon. I sort of see like a little image of a saint or something. And then I see hands joined and
connecting.
Yeah, it's like you can discover within the tree branches, which is true. You can discover so many more things of just like this intertwining and these stories that are not, the main point probably of this work. So I'd say it's probably it would be nice to see it in real life in its true size to investigate more.
Maria states that this image collage blends two images from my own emigration/immigration. I shot the base image from one of my favorite places in New York City, Pier 57. The other image transposed over New York's harbor are trees from the lane near where I grew up in Greystones. Tree roots reach deep and have a complex network of connection through mycorrhiza or fungal roots. This complex symbiosis provides a metaphor for our own human relations that spread invisibly as we migrate to distant places. Even though we are scattered, we remain connected by many threads to our own roots. And as I look at it, Katrina, all I can think about now is how that horizon line is falling off, and whether potentially she is more infatuated by the trees at home than she is about the kind of somewhat asymmetrical skyline. But this is the second piece, which is more horizontal in shape. It looks at the beautiful coastline of New Haven, and then it also has a tree to the right, which is from Greystones. This second piece is called Scatter Greystones, Ireland to New Haven, Connecticut, USA. This photo collage blends two images from my own emigration, like the other. The image of the beach is from Greystones, where I grew up, and transposed over it an image of a tree from where I live now, New Haven, Connecticut. She is trying to, I suppose, potentially show the migration or the emigration that she's had between the many locations that she's lived in. And I think this piece does that equally so.
It's a very satisfying image composition. I quite like the use of the overlay of the sky behind the tree, blending well with the sky on like the beach image. And I'm really tickled by the small little details. Like I can see something vaguely in the distance. I don't know, some dots. Not quite sure what that could be out there in the water. But I also like the little inclusion of probably like a life-saving ring on the beach. If you like
yes,
look at the, I mean, that's probably what it is. And then there seem to be more in the distance. So they kind of scatter, you know, the beach line going however far they're going, which seeing that as well brings another meaning to this image, because, you know, of all these media images that we're surrounded with, the lifeboats and beaches and shores with people coming by boat to countries. It's quite quiet, can be unsettling depending on your viewpoint of the symbolism behind these details.
Again, I think I understand what she's trying to say in these pieces, and that like that you never fully get away from who you were to begin with, and that you bring it with you, you know, and in your memories and in your genes even, you know, you actually bring where you're from originally with you, no matter where you travel to.
Those two pieces are photo collage. They're inkjet print on Niodo paper, and they are both available for sale on the Nua Collective website at nuacollective.com, along with all of the artworks that you've just seen through this very special presentation of our Scatter exhibition. So that concludes our review of the Scatter collection. And if you do want to check them out, make sure you do so at www.nuacollective.com/scatter. The link will be in the bio, so do check it out. And if you have an opportunity, please share this with your friends and family, or even just share the link with all of the artworks with your friends and family to try and get some sales for these artists for their Christmas hampers potentially. Very worthy Christmas present to get one of these pieces, and they're all very affordable. So please do support artists, support the living artists by purchasing one of these. Thank you very much, Katrina. Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you, John, for going through this wonderful collection with us. As you can see, there has been a huge amount of insight into these different pieces, and as you can also see that, you know, everyone's interpretation can be different, and we can always get more and more from the life of the art once it leaves the artist's studio. Well, do check us out, nuacollective.com, and on all our social channels. That's all for us, folks. Thank you and goodbye.